Hello, my dear students, and welcome to today's IELTS speaking masterclass. So, let's see. Today we will be talking about some IELTS speaking strategies. But first of all, before we get into that, I would like to introduce myself. So, my name is Tessa, and I've been an English teacher for the past 5 years. And I've also been helping students pass their exam for the past 4 years. Of course, I'm TEFL certified, which just means that I am certified to teach English as a second language. And also, I myself was in your position once upon a time because I had to take the IELTS so that I could go to study to a foreign country. And I took the IELTS myself and scored an 8.5 in my test overall. And now I'm in Denmark studying at Copenhagen Business School. So I can totally relate to you and what you're going through when it comes to preparing for the IELTS exam, from a teacher's point of view and from a student's point of view. So I'm here to help you get a high score as well. Let's go and get started. So today, first, I want to cover how do we actually get the score? How do they decide if you're a 6, a 7, a 7.5? So when you go into your IELTS speaking exam, the examiner will score you on 4 criteria, okay? So our first criteria here is fluency and coherence. Then we have a lexical resource, grammar, and pronunciation. Okay, so these are the criteria for the speaking exam. And what does fluency and coherence mean? Well, in order to get a high score, you have to paraphrase well, you have to speak fluently, and speak coherently. Now, what does coherently mean? Well, coherently means logical. Okay, so if you're coherent, you're logical, which means that everything you say makes sense. It has a logical pattern, right? And this is where a lot of students do have problems because they don't know what to say, or they stutter, they just don't sound fluent because they're not certain of what they are saying. So in order to get a high score here, we need to do these 3 things. Okay. Now, let's take a look at lexical resource. Lexical resource is vocabulary. So the amount of words that you know, right? And in order to get a higher score in vocabulary, you need to use advanced vocabulary. Now, when I say advanced vocabulary, I don't mean some super complicated word that nobody uses, like, I don't know, the word confabulation. No, I mean that instead of saying I like, you are going to say I am keen on. Okay? So this is advanced vocabulary. And this is very simple vocabulary. So that's the difference. We want to use words that people use in their everyday life. Not some books from a dictionary, not some words from a dictionary. Okay, the next one is to use idioms. So this is actually a requirement for a 7. If you don't use idioms, you can't get a 7 in vocabulary. And an example of an idiom is, for example, the expression no use crying over spilt milk. And this just means that you shouldn't be sad about something that you can't change, right? So these are idioms and they're really important for getting a high score. And the next one is to avoid repetition. And when I say this, that this just means that you don't want to say the same word over and over again. Okay, so for example, if the word is like, right, you start your answer with I like flowers, okay? And then you want to say again, I like roses. You're not going to say like one more time. You're going to say, I love roses instead of like. So you're not repeating the same word. So that's a vocabulary real quick. Then we have grammar and grammar range. So of course you should make as few mistakes as possible, but the more important thing here is to know how to use complex sentences. We will cover complex sentences in another lesson, but that's the most important thing for grammar, knowing how to use different types of complex sentences. And then for pronunciation, the most important thing is that you are understandable and that you can pronounce the sounds in the English language correctly, right? Now, a lot of students, especially a lot of Chinese students, have a problem with vowel sounds. Vowel sounds are the sounds that are produced from the letters A, E, O, U, and I. Right, so a lot of my Chinese students would, for example, have a problem with a long A, and instead of saying plane, right, they would say plan or plan, right? So that's a common problem, but that's all very fixable. So be careful with the vowel sounds. They're really important. There's a vowel in each word, at least one. And then I want you to understand that your accent doesn't really matter that much. You don't need to have an American or a British accent. All that matters is your pronunciation and intonation, right? Okay, so these are the basics. So for example, if you were to score a 6 in fluency, a 7 in lexical resource, a 6 in grammar, and a 7 in pronunciation, you would get a 6.5. right? If you get a 7 in all of these, you get a 7, and so on and so on. So we obviously need to learn everything. We can't just learn grammar and think we are going to get a high score on the IELTS exam. We need to learn all parts of the exam. So today, in this lesson, I want to share with you how you can improve your fluency and coherence. So some of the most common problems that I hear from my students are that they can understand English well, but they're just not fluent. They don't know what to talk about, and they're nervous or anxious when they speak. And they're nervous and anxious because they don't want to make mistakes, and that's completely normal. But all of that really impacts your fluency and coherence. So today we're going to talk about how to fix that, okay? So first, this is the first step. This is what we're going to do in a few moments here. Learn speaking strategies for answering IELTS questions. Okay, that's something I'm going to teach you today. And then the next step is learn vocabulary that increases your fluency. These are mostly connecting words like thereafter, furthermore, finally, and so on, stuff like that. Those things really increase your fluency because they help tell a story. We're not going to be covering that today because we won't have enough time, but that's something you can learn on your own, and I will cover it in a future lesson. And the last part is practice. It's never easy. You can't just watch one video and know everything. English is like a muscle. You need to exercise it. Think of English like running. If you run 5 kilometers every day, right, you're running 5 kilometers is really easy. But if you didn't run for a year and you try to run 5 kilometers, that's going to be really hard. So the most important thing is to practice. When you learn the strategy, you start practicing it, and it's going to become easier and easier. Okay, so those are the steps on how to fix it. Let's go into the actual strategies that I'm going to be teaching today. So I will be covering 4 strategies today, and the first one is the PREC strategy. The second one is the triangle strategy. Then we have the it depends strategy. And finally, the listing strategy. Okay, so these are the 4 strategies we will learn today. Let's go into it. First, we will go into the PREC strategy. Now, PREC here stands for point, reason, example, and conclusion. Okay, so these are the things you want to say when you are answering a question. Point is just the simple answer to the question. Like if the question is, what color do you like? The simple answer is, I like the color blue. Okay, but you would say something like, oh, I love the color blue, or my favorite color is blue. You wouldn't say, I like the color blue. That's too simple. And then the next part of the structure is the reason. So when we give a point, when we give an opinion or an experience, we have to give a reason as well. So then we say why. Why is that your answer? So if my answer was, my favorite color is the color blue, I would say, because it's so calming to look at. It's very peaceful, right? So see, that's my reason. Then I go into an example. So here you can give examples or personal experiences related to the question. So, for example, I would say, for example, when I look at the blue sky, I feel very calm, right? And then you have the conclusion, where you quickly sum up your answer. And the conclusion really isn't necessary in part number 1 of the IELTS speaking exam, but it's a nice touch in part number 3 of the IELTS speaking exam. So basically, if I were to put a conclusion to this answer, which I wouldn't, but if I would say, so that's why I love the color blue. But it's really not needed for a simple question like this. And a few more things about the PREC strategy. So the PREC strategy is great for most questions in the IELTS exam. Like for most questions, you will have a simple answer, a reason, or an example, right? And it's a go-to strategy for part 1, but it can be used in part 3 as well. However, in part 3, I would even put like 2 points or 2 examples, just maybe kind of expand it a little bit. And of course you can make alterations. Maybe sometimes you don't have a reason, or sometimes you don't have an example. You can do point, reason, reason, conclusion, or point, example, example, conclusion. So you can kind of mix it up. But it's a good structure to use for almost any question in the IELTS exam, really. But of course, you don't want to be using only one structure. Now, let's do an example question here. I picked this question. What do you like about your hometown? So if I were to go to the point here, I wrote, well, I would have to say the thing I like the most about my hometown is the scenery. This is supposed to be the word. My bad. Okay, so the thing I like the most about my hometown is the scenery. So that's my point, okay? Now I'm going to go into the reason, right? The town where I grew up is located in the mountains. So it is surrounded by incredibly beautiful natural scenery. So I said, why is the scenery the reason? Why is that my point, right? Because it's very beautiful, okay? Then I go for an example or an experience with this. So when I was growing up, I used to always climb this hill that looked over my town and the forest. The view from the hill was breathtaking. So this is a really good example for why you like the scenery. And then conclusion, again for part number 1, really not needed. But you can add something like this. There are a lot of amazing things about my hometown, but this one is definitely my favorite. Right, so we conclude it very nicely. Of course, these answers can be simpler. These are a bit more advanced. but of course you can use simpler examples or simpler reasons. That's completely fine. It's important, at this point, it's very important just to stick to the strategy so your speaking is logical. See how this is all very logical. Now I want you to practice, okay? So I want you to pause the video here, and I have a practice question for you here. Is eating healthy and exercising important to you? So go ahead and pause, and then unpause when you're ready to continue. Okay, good job practicing. Let's go and continue to the next strategy we have here. The next strategy is the triangle strategy. I love this strategy. It's really, really useful. So, why is it called the triangle strategy? Well, it's because we are answering the question from 3 perspectives, right? So the first perspective is what some people think or do. The second perspective is what other people think or do. And the third one is what you think or do. Okay? And this is an amazing one for part number 3. It's really, really nice. So let's go ahead and see this in an example, because I think that's the best way you will understand how to use it. Here I picked the question, do people in your country like to drink coffee? And it's a total coincidence that I'm drinking coffee now. So let's see. First we have perspective number 1. So, well, younger people love drinking coffee since it gives them a lot of energy for studying. So remember, that's what some people think or do here. The first perspective is young people. Okay, can't spell. Young people. Okay, so that's our first perspective. Then I'm gonna do perspective number 2. However, so I'm talking about something else now. I use the word however to indicate that. However, older people tend to stick to traditions, so they prefer drinking tea. So my second perspective, what other people think or do, is older people, right? And then we go into perspective number 3. I personally can't go without coffee. I drink 1 cup every morning. So this is your opinion. And this makes a really, really nice answer and a really logical one. Okay, so you gave a really good image of, do people like to drink coffee in your country? And again, I have a practice question for you guys. So now that you've learned the triangle strategy, let's try and practice it. Pause the video again and answer the question, what sports are popular in your country? Pause and come back when you're ready. Okay, good job. Let's move on to the third strategy we have here. So the next one is the it depends strategy. Now this is a very useful one, because sometimes you just can't give a straightforward answer. Sometimes it's not like a yes or no. Sometimes you just can't say for sure what's your answer. So in this scenario, we use the it depends strategy, right? We can use this strategy in both part 1 and part 3. Really good for both. And here we are answering the question from 2 perspectives. However, the perspective and answer changes based on the specific situation, right? So the 2 perspectives depend on a certain conditional, okay? And that's where the it depends comes in. That's why here we don't have just perspective 1 and perspective 2. We also have an introduction where we will say what the answer depends on, because in some cases it can be A and in some cases it can be B. Let's see an example here. So I picked is it better to live in the city or in the countryside? Okay. And for my introduction, I said, well, I would say that depends on how old someone is. So here the conditional, the perspective that changes is how old you are. Okay, so here I'll talk about perspective number 1. If you are a young person who wants to advance in their career, I think it is better to live in a big city because cities are full of job opportunities. Wherever you can add a reason, right? Add it. Yeah, I mean, you could say it's better to live in a big city, but adding the reason just adds to your answer. So that's always a good idea. Then we have perspective number 2. And here, because I'm talking about the totally different perspective, right? I will use something like on the other hand. So I'm talking about something that's contrasting to this. If you're an older person, so that's my second perspective, older people. If you're an older person who is in retirement, I think it would be much nicer to settle down in a peaceful area in the countryside. See how the answer changes based on how old a person is. So that's why we use the it depends strategy here. And again, a really useful strategy both for part 1 and part 3. So now let's do the practice question. And again, just pause the video and continue when you're ready. The question here is, do celebrities have a right to privacy? So that's our question here. Good luck. All right, good job. Let's go to our last strategy here. Okay, the last strategy is the listing strategy. And this is, okay, well, this is very rarely used because you usually wouldn't have so much to talk about, but it's used when you have more than 2 points or answers, okay? It's too long for part number 1, so you wouldn't use it in part number 1, you would only use it for part number 3. And an important thing is that you want to add additional information for all of the answers. So you remember how we had point, reason, example, conclusion? Well, for each answer, you could go like answer plus reason or answer plus example. 1, don't use both because it's going to be too long if you use both a reason and an example. And then you add another answer number 2 plus reason number 2. Answer number 3 plus reason number 3 or example, whatever you choose. And when you're using this strategy, you need to use listing markers. So for example, first and foremost, firstly, secondly, furthermore, last but not least, finally. All of these words are great to use in the listing strategy because they indicate what number you are talking about now, right? They indicate you're going to the next point, to the next answer. Okay. So let's see this in an example. Here I picked the question, how can someone lead a healthy life? So answer number 1 here would be, first of all, if you want to if you want to live a healthy life, you should eat properly. You need to stay away from junk food and try to eat as many fruits and vegetables as possible. See how I said, okay, so this was my answer. You need to eat properly. But then I added some information. So this is kind of like an example how you can do it. Eat as many fruits and vegetables as possible. So just add 1 thing to your answer, not 2 or 3. Then we have answer number 2. Furthermore, everyone knows you need to exercise to be healthy. Taking up a sport or taking walks every day is a great way to keep fit. Again, exercise is my answer, and taking up a sport or taking walks is my additional information. Then we have answer number 3. Last but not least, we should also reduce the stress in our lives in order to stay healthy. Finding time for relaxation and hobbies is essential for a healthy mind. So, reduce stress is my answer number 3. Additional information is relaxation and hobbies, right? And you should pay attention to, first of all, furthermore, last but not least, when I'm switching answers, I'm always using these markers so that the speaker that I'm talking to knows what I'm talking about, right? This is so they don't get confused. Okay. And yeah, that's the listing strategy. Really straightforward, easy to use. If you have a lot to talk about, you can use this strategy. Now, let's practice again. One more, last time, I promise. So, practice question. What makes a good student? Pause the video, come back when you're done. Okay. And yeah, that's it for today's strategies. But guys, like it says here, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There are other strategies, and there's also a lot more you need to do. So like I said, it's not enough to watch this video. Now you have to practice it. Okay? Take your time and practice what you learned today, because that's how you're going to actually learn it and retain the knowledge. And I want you to thank you all for coming to my masterclass. It's been a really nice time teaching you. I hope it was really helpful for you guys. And if you are interested in doing any work with me one-on-one, you want to become my student in my IELTS speaking course, you can book a 45-minute trial lesson with me by clicking the link in the description. So, thank you very much for attending today's class. You were awesome, and I hope to see you again next time.